Right, so just a very quick introduction. So I'm based in Brussels and I'm heading the public affairs and stakeholder engagement work for RICS for Europe. And of course, we're also part of the EMF evaluation committee as well. And we're very happy and thank you for the excellent, organization by the staff of the EMF-ECBC for today. And in fact, for the next few days. Conscious that we didn't get coffee during the break, so I'll make sure that we'll speed through it. So today I'm looking at decarbonization roadmap from a valuer's perspective. And of course, RICS, as we call it, is a professional body with global members across 134 countries, and we had more than 140,000 members across different professions. And it's important to highlight that different surveyors within the organization. And for the purpose of today, we're zooming in on the valuation surveyor, or the valuer, as we say. And the topic of sustainability or decarbonization obviously interlays through all of them, and everything is more or less interconnected. So maybe to set the scene a little bit, we released our sustainability report in November last year. And the RICS Sustainable Building Index, which is basically a measure of investor and occupier demand for green buildings. And here we look at the definition of green buildings as buildings that are energy and resource efficient, have low carbon performance, and achieve high rating according to various green building certifications around the world. And the latest report indicate that there is indeed a growing demand for green buildings, and of course not surprising that in Europe the demand is the highest. And this is of course in part spurred by regulation, and of course there are higher standards at place as well. And in this chart here, we look at the investor demand for green properties, and not surprising there, Europe is leading. Compared to the 2 years ago, America was trailing behind the other regions, and last year the latest report indicated to be the same at 36%. Europe stands on the opposite end of the spectrum with 68%, suggesting that investor appetite for green building has increased. And when we talk about, when we look at the question of in the area you operate in, do green buildings achieve a rental or a pricing premium over comparable non-green buildings? In this particular chart, no surprising there as well. Globally, 44% suggest that green buildings are subject to rent premium over the comparable non-green building. And about 31% seems to believe that the premium is up by 10%, whereas 13% believe that the premium could be higher. And of course, and this is with regards to rent, but when you look at the impact of green credentials on prices, the results is much more robust. So globally, about 50% believe that green buildings are subject to price premium. But of course, there is, here you look at the regional difference in comparing Middle East, Africa, APAC, and Europe as well. So overall, in general, I think America's lagged behind the other regions, and no surprising there given the current climate as well. So talking about climate change, resilience to climate change, so this is only moderately important to occupiers and investors globally based on the survey that we have conducted. And if you look at the chart comparison, I think the climate change is much more important for them from the investor's point of view. And this is because it could increase in insurance premium, depreciation of assets, the whole topic about stranded assets, and higher capital costs. So this is what the survey has indicated. And based on the overall global respondents as well, it is the demand from clients, stakeholders, and customers that is really the driving force behind ESG investment. So overall, in conclusion from the latest report, higher quality, better performing real estate in the right location that will meet the need of the user tend to be higher in value. So a little bit of myth busting when it comes to valuation. It is not the creation of value, it's important to note. Valuation is not talking about the price that an asset but that will be mandating the price an asset will sell for. It doesn't apply averages to individual situation, and the market doesn't always follow models, and it's not a crystal ball where people can predict the future in an absolute sense. But it could be a very useful tool because it could provide reassurance around investment in an asset, and educate the valuation user, and in this case the clients as well, around important factors, and of course as a comparison element. And this is the definition of ESG as that is mentioned in the International Valuation Standards. And of course, as you may or may not be aware, the RICS Global Red Book implements the IVS. And so in the latest update, it has also established the meaning of sustainability and how ESG will be the assessment tool and framework, and sustainability being the goal and the outcome. So what is the task at hand? Of course, when you talk about valuation, it's very different from giving a strategic risk advice. It's not a corporate disclosure, it's not a building survey, and it's not a transition risk analysis. And again, the Red Book here specify the latest updates, specify what the valuers must do when it comes to ESG factors. And again, this is of course an implementation of the latest IVS standard as well. So moving on, so where are we in terms, as I mentioned earlier, we are a professional body that sets standards, and one of our flagship standards is the RICS Global Red Book for Valuation. We had an update, and which was published December last year, and is effective from 31st of January this year as well. And as I mentioned, it incorporates the IVS ESG standards, and there will be an upcoming update to the Global ESG and Commercial Property Valuation Standard. So the drafting is currently underway, and we expect a consultation at one point, probably between Q2 and Q3 of this year as well, with a target date of publication in December. And here we're also looking at incorporating an appendix, looking only at UK and EU, but I will get to it a little bit later. So integration of new IVS ESG standards. Obviously, we look at, there was a new update on the terms of engagement, the asset type, and so on. And it also specified there that the terms of engagement must include what is the necessary requirements in relation to the consideration of ESG factors, and so on. So the new update consists of the VPGA 8, and here are a snapshot basically of the different indicators under E, S, and G that has been noted down. And it's very important to say that this is not a checklist, and it is up to the consideration as well, depending on the asset class that is being valued, what kind of valuation it is, geographical needs, and so on. So we recently ran a workshop during MIPIM where we were looking at what are the typical indicators that would fall within that valuers will take into account in Europe as well. And of course, most of them fall within the E category. And earlier I mentioned this update, so there will be a UK and EU appendixes, and the intention here is that for the EU appendix, we will probably incorporate the ESG data list, which I will be talking about shortly. So this is an industry initiative that started back in 2022, and so we call it the RICS European Leaders Forum, looking at the impact of ESG on valuation. And essentially, the objective is very simple, is to embed the requirement of ESG into valuation and the valuation process. And it was very important for us that obviously it cannot be a one-sided discussion. So around the table, we have the big valuation service providers, usually a representative on a European or EMEA level. Then we have the industry bodies. bodies. So EMF in this case is a member. We have the listed, non-listed investor, the real estate side, so through EPRA and INREF, and member representative from those industry bodies itself. And obviously we have the IVSC, we have the World Green Building Council and so on, and very recently IIGCCF also joined us. And sitting as an observer, we have the EBA and ECB, because obviously it's important for them to understand what the market is doing, what are the concerns and challenges and the solutions as well. And one of the tangible output of this Leaders Forum, which is still ongoing, is essentially what we call the valuation ESG data list. So this was published in February last year, and we're still actively, promoting and talking about it and embedding it, because the idea is not to have something that's on the shelf. It should be something that we should implement and to make it into a practical implementation. So we try to limit the scope. It's purely just the EU looking at real estate on an asset level, so not portfolio. What we have done is basically as a collective as a collective group, we agree on 12 core indicators, and then we have again another list called the future potential indicators. Here what it means is that from a core indicators point of view, it just means that if you have to incorporate ESG indicators, what can everyone agree on, because alignment is key in this whole discussion. And future potential in this case is because we couldn't have a unanimous agreement on the indicator. It could be something that become a core indicator in 2 months' time, in a year's time, or half-year time. Obviously it depends on the change in regulation and so on as well, and then we provide and so on. So these are the indicators. The one in purple would be the core, and the one in blue would be future potential indicators. This was what was agreed collectively. We revisit this topic again in December last year as a group, and we agreed not to change it for the time being in terms of which indicators sit on. This is just a snapshot of what it looks like. So we talk about what are the data that we captured, what are the unit of measurement, and in the explanatory note, of course, we try to link with existing legislation, which has, of course, changed a lot since its publication, and there will be an update that we'll be working on. We try to look at what are the different asset classes, if possible, where applicable. What is important here, we look at the data source, so who is the one who is supposed to be providing the data to the valuer in this case, so what's the preferred approach, whether it's a comparative risk or income, and then you look at the drivers, where we try to indicate what are the various drivers that is there. So again, here another example. Future potential indicators, we don't go too much into the detail as well, but obviously when this would shift into the core data indicator, we would then expand on it. And earlier I mentioned about this workshop that we did in MIPIM, which was much more practical. And this is an example of how, let's say you are a valuer, how you can work with a tech company, and like what kind of details or information that they can provide, and how that would be fit, like how this information can be translated into use by the valuer for the purpose of a valuation report. And here, there's an example here. What are the data source? What are the main drivers and so on. So we went through all different indicators, and I will spare you the details of it, but this is in a way how valuers and tech firm or data firm could work together in trying to get those information. Because one of the challenges, the reason why we also set up this European Leaders Forum was because we always had different conversation with different stakeholders. One says, I have X amount of data, what do I do with it? Can I ensure that this is actually reflected in a valuation report? And then you get the valuation side saying, well, we are not technical experts per se, but then how do we, it's not really we may not necessarily have the right skill sets or the expert knowledge to be able to interpret the data. So in a way, bringing all these different stakeholders together is really to align on expectation and to manage that as well. And of course, when we did a very quick comparison between the data list, and so we did a mapping with the INREF SDDS, because again, it's about not reinventing the wheel. One data indicator that is being requested elsewhere is the same as in this particular case as well, and we are undergoing different mapping as well. We're looking into mapping with the EPRA one. We have done one with the Better Building Partnership Sustainability Acquisition Toolkit, for example. And on national level, and if you talk about the Netherlands, for example, we're also trying to map it with the DUPA initiative. So Lucia there already talked a lot about the RSC project. I'm one of the authors beside Hugh of this paper, so I'll skip this, which saves us time for coffee. And then we go into the last segment, which is looking at practical application in valuation. So earlier I talked about the 3 drivers. This is very important to identify. The risk driver, basically how do you elevate the property's risk profile. Here you talk about the physical climate risk element, the cash flow driver, and then of course you look at the value driver and how it directly impacts the property value. Here you talk about energy efficiency, location, certification, and so on. This obviously is just an example, so it's not obviously a fixed list, so to say. And again, it depends on the terms of engagement that you've agreed with your valuation service providers, what are the assets that we're looking at, and what is the reason, what is the purpose of it, and so on. And in a very quick nutshell, you look at inspection and of the data here being key, reference to market evidence, wider economic evidence. You look at the modeling of known, current, and pending related operational costs and capital costs. You do analysis, and then there's the legal analysis as well. So this is really just a very quick snapshot of what is really involved in the process from a valuer perspective. And what I failed to mention earlier with the ESG data list, we do try to encourage a comply or explain approach, but obviously, depending on the region, depending on the service providers as well, we are increasingly also trying to encourage to do comply and explain, because we do not assume that there is data availability everywhere as well. And so where a data is not available, is not given to the valuer, and it is not relevant for the asset that is being valued, then within the valuation report, we should try to encourage a comply and explain approach. As I said, sustainability is sort of intertwined within the different profession as well, and it's not just looking at it from an evaluation perspective only. So it's so integrated in everything that we will need to have we need to be much more holistic in our approach, and increasingly you start to see with valuation service providers firm that they also have different, departments and directorates within the organization, trying to provide like a one-stop shop, aspect of how do you look at an asset and so on. And of course, apart from the RICS Red Book or the Global Evaluation Standard, we also have a plethora of different, standards that look at the whole life carbon, the cost measurement, and so on. And the idea here is how do we integrate all this and how do we approach it from a holistic approach so that we can actually get a better view of what's happening. And of course, the challenge here remains like moving away from empirical evidence to market evidence. And I think that's what a lot of investors would like to know. Where do we find the figures? If you put that in, if you have incorporated ESG into your CapEx spending, for example, would that be reflected or not? And this will always be that perpetual question that we always get. And the Leaders Forum, to be honest, has been very helpful in trying to bring all these different stakeholders group together to have that very robust conversation. And because it's not recorded, people were very, very, open in sharing. And this is really necessary because the industry needs to move forward together. So that leads to the conclusion. I'll be very quick. So if you are a user of valuation, then obviously you are in a good position to agree to terms of engagement engagement where reasonable, consider the challenges that you would need to solve. And then on no magic numbers, earlier I said, valuers do not have like a crystal ball, so to say, and we need to spend more time looking at resources, looking at the options and the potential solution, and it potentially could be difficult for periodic fund, for example. But what is the market doing? So we need to, talk to each other, and if you're in the market, have conversation with each other, try to understand the investment and transaction decision making as much as possible on a deeper level as well. Try to get the CapEx spending and to reflect on the hypothetical decisions of market participants. And then irrespective of what our views are, geographical situation and update to regulation and so on, I think we can all agree that there is a story to tell about how better performance measurement can lead to a more accurate observation. There are examples that are out there, and we just need to share and to encourage to show what kind of assets when you have incorporated certain updates on improvement from a sustainability point of view, whether they have increased the value or not. So the more information we can share with each other amongst the market, the more, encouraging it would be. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gina. Can I ask what might be a dumb question, but I'll ask it anyway. You mentioned the standards coming in, I think, on the 31st of January, a specific date for implementation.
Yep.
For new valuations. Thinking, as a former banker, about existing assets that are collateral, there's trillions of assets that could be potentially very significantly impacted, where perhaps you don't record the data, but it could be material. Is there any kind of back testing or any ability to apply it to existing collateral?
Well, you do your evaluation report on an annual basis, and so then what it does encourage is that in the new report, then it should consider which will be applicable for existing assets or existing valuation of assets. Then you should try to incorporate the new, ESG consideration into it. But the truth is that depending on which region you're in, a lot of the big firms are already doing it prior to this new update to the standard, and so this is just making it more concrete and how to uplift also the SMEs firm to also do the same, because obviously it's an easy task when you talk about the big service providers, but then the challenge remains how do you educate the SMEs firms with valuers, who may not have the resource with big departments where you have a risk assessment or you have consultancy service within the firm. How do you uplift them from a skill perspective to take that into consideration? So that's why it's not a mandatory requirement. It is a high-level principle, and obviously it is encouraged. But then what is really important to note, it also takes into account the geographical requirements from a regulation point of view as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.